While Google Docs, Sheets, and Slides are considered as relatively the most well-known applications in Google Suite, there are a hidden variety of useful tools that are also available to us. One of these applications is Google Forms. Through Forms, we're able to create our own personalized surveys, feedbacks, and forms that are very important to an increasingly digital-dependent world. In this video, we're going to showcase some of the features and functions that make Google Forms one of the most premier applications within Google Suite. To start, we can access Google Forms through the previously discussed Google Drive. Hover over and click the new icon on the left-hand side of our Drive homepage, and we will be able to see the Google Form icon on the lower part of the menu. Click this icon to access Google Forms. The first thing we're going to see is an untitled form. One of the first things that is recommended for us to do is to name our forms appropriately, depending on the topic of the form we are creating. Furthermore, you may also add a short and brief description as such. Although this is not a requirement, doing so helps the survey participants understand the purpose of the forms we are making. After giving your form a title and a brief description, down below we can see that there's already a pre-made question for us. Generally, in surveys and participant feedback, the first thing we're going to ask is their name. After typing our question regarding the participant's name, we can see that Google Forms automatically changed the question type from multiple choice to a short answer type. Google Forms assumed that since we're asking for the participant's name, having the answer in multiple choices will not be appropriate, as we want them to type out their names. This ability to change the form of the questions is one of the most powerful features of Google Forms. If you think that the question you are asking will need a different form of question, just hover over and click the short answer icon on the right-hand side of our menu to see the other forms of question. Other forms of answers include paragraph answers, multiple choices, checkboxes, drop-down, linear scale answers, multiple choice grid, checkbox grid, date, and time. Okay, so let us move on. For the next one, let us assume that the question that we're asking would need a multiple choice answer like this. With this option, you can see that we can edit the question choices as needed. Let us start by clicking on option 1. Doing this will allow us to name our choices depending on what we want it to be. Afterwards, we can add choices if we click the Add Option button directly below our first choice. With this button, we can add how many choices we desire as such. Finally, if the participants can't select from the choices we have provided, we can click on the Others button beside the Add Choices button. This will allow them to type out their answer if it is not on the choices we have provided. If we added too many choices, remember that we can delete this by clicking on the X button on the far right side of the menu. Also notice that we can move choices from one spot to another by dragging the button on the left-hand side of the menu as such. Finally, if we want to further contextualize the choices we have provided, we can add pictures in tandem to make them more clearer to our participants. We can do so by clicking on the Image button directly on the left of the X button we clicked earlier. Selecting this would open a pop-up menu that would allow us to upload pictures from different sources, such as our computer, our camera, through Google Images, and others. Next up, we can see that there are a lot of buttons on the far right side of our question interface. After finishing up on one of our questions, it is only natural for us to continue adding more questions. The first button on this menu allows us to do so.
Clicking the button will add another question for us to work on. The next button, however, allows us to import existing questions from another Google form. Clicking that button will allow us to copy questions from previously made Google Forms. This will help us shorten our time instead of manually typing questions we have already made before. The next button, on the other hand, allows us to add a title and description to our questions. Doing so allows the participants to have some context before answering our questions. This is greatly helpful in more complex and comprehensive forms and surveys, such as in research, for example. Furthermore, if you want to add something that isn't a question but is incredibly vital for the participants answering the question, you can use this button to do so. The next buttons are the Add Image and Add Video buttons. Just like the previous button we have talked about, doing this will allow us to give context or information to our participants before they answer a question. This may be helpful when a set of questions are related to a certain image and/or video that we have uploaded to further guide them in answering the questions. Just click on the button and we would have the option to pick images and videos from a variety of different sources discussed earlier. Finally, we can also use the final button to add some sections. These are incredibly important for longer surveys or forms. As a participant of a certain survey, it is normal for you to manually skim through the survey before answering to check if it is too long or not. This can greatly affect our participants' motivation in answering our forms. Separating the survey or the form into sections allows you to retain participants' attention and will also help you organize your questions into similar themes or topics.
The next icons are located at the lower part of our question interface. The first button allows you to duplicate the questions. The second button allows you to delete this question. The next button is the required button, which notifies your participant that this question is required and must be answered. The final button, however, gives a description to your question, which again provides some context to your participants.
Now that we are armed with the knowledge of the various features regarding Google Forms, we can now finish up our survey. But before sending out the link or sharing the form to our intended participants, it is important to remember that we can edit the image and color scheme of our forms to fit a certain theme. Up here at the top of our screen, on the right-hand side of the menu, we can see a Customize Theme button. If we click on that icon, a menu will appear that shall allow us to customize and design our form. Here, we can edit the header image of our forms by clicking on the Choose Image button, where a pop-up menu will appear and we would be presented with different sources to find the perfect image for our form. Aside from that, we can also change the color scheme of our survey by clicking on a preferred color. Finally, we can also change the fonts based on what we prefer and what is appropriate for the form we are making. Now that we have customized the theme of our form and we have also created our questions, it is only normal to check the preview of what we did. Thankfully, this is possible in Google Forms. Beside the Customize Theme button is the Preview button, and it allows us to see what a participant sees in our form. Here, we can check for mistakes and corrections that we have made during the editing process to make our final product clear, correct and appropriate for our intended participants. Before we send out our form, let us take a quick look into the settings. In this, we can have lots of options to further customize our forms. Here, we can have the option to turn our form into a quiz. This is incredibly helpful for teachers or instructors. We can also edit the settings on how the participants' responses are managed once they have answered our forms. We can have the option to collect their email addresses. We can also give our participants the option to see and edit their answers once they are done with it. On the other hand, we can also restrict participants and limit their number of responses by clicking these buttons. Under presentation settings, we can have the option to include a progress bar for our participants, which is greatly useful for relatively longer surveys and forms. Here, we can also have the option to shuffle the questions, which is once again useful in quizzes. Overall, this menu showcases a lot of hidden options and features that we can use to further contextualize and make our forms appropriate to our target audiences. Now that we have checked the settings on our forms and we have finalized its content, it's time to send out our form to its intended participants. There are 3 different ways to do so. The first way is through an email. First, we must click the Send button on the upper right side of our screen. Afterwards, hover over and select the email icon on the pop-up menu. Here, we can type out the emails of the people we would like to send our forms to. Furthermore, we can also use this pop-up menu to write messages and send emails to the people we're inviting. This shall help in simplifying the process of sending emails and messages. Next up, we can also send our forms through a link. Beside the email icon, hover over and select the next button. This will give us a link to our forms that we can copy and paste anywhere on the internet. We also have the option to shorten our link if you're going to be posting it on social media. Finally, we can also send our forms through embedding. This allows us to include our form into the source code of a website, which is especially useful for web developers and software engineers. After sending out our form to our intended participants, it is recommended for us to regularly check our forms to see if someone has responded. This can be seen beside the settings button we clicked earlier. The number beside the responses button indicates the number of people who have responded and answered our form. Clicking on this button allows us to see and review the responses and answers they have provided. Depending on how you want it, you can change how the results and answers are presented to you. In the middle of the screen, we can see 3 buttons. Selecting the leftmost button allows us to view the responses in a more general manner. All questions and their corresponding answers are presented here, which allows us to review the entirety of our form at once. Clicking on the question button, on the other hand, allows us to focus on one question at a time and check out the individual answers to this question. We can change the question being highlighted by hovering over and clicking on the button below and selecting the question we desire. This is incredibly helpful in checking and reviewing demographic information provided by our participants, such as their name, grade, age, and other personal information. The final button is the individual button. Clicking this allows us to focus on one individual at a time. By doing this, we are provided by all the answers and responses provided by a single participant. Though this is not the preferred way of viewing responses, as it is very specific and time-consuming, it allows us to notice trends in answers in specific participants, which is very helpful in research. Now that we have checked and reviewed the data, The next step is to organize the answers that has been collected. Normally, what we do is we manually encode this data to a spreadsheet that will allow us to organize and categorize the answers we collected. Thankfully, this has been automatized by Google Forms. By clicking on the green icon on the upper right side of our menu, it automatically transfers all the data we collected into an uneditable and modifiable Google Sheets document. This will help simplify our encoding process.
And with that, our video comes to a close. I hope these basic tips help you use this application more efficiently. Thanks for watching.